Hi.
Hello.
First of all, we would like to thank the team of FMX for having inviting us to this 26th edition. We are very happy to be here and we hope you will enjoy our presentation. We are here representing the studio of Unity Image, studio located in Paris and specialized in 3D and visual effects. It was founded in 2010 by four 3D supervisors, each with a distinct area of expertise: animation, VFX, rendering, and matte painting. Here are some projects we have worked on: God of War, Beyond Good and Evil 2, Far Cry 6, and more recently, The Call and Elden Ring.
My name is Toby Toussaint. I have been the cloth supervisor at Unity Image for 4 years. I joined Unity Image 5 years ago on the Beyond Good and Evil 2 project. Before that, I was a CFX artist at Illumination MacGuff for several projects, including Despicable Me 3.
And I am Laura Guerreiro, CFX Hair and Character Supervisor. I joined the team of Unity Image in 2015, and since then I participated on many projects. I started as a character artist and an FX artist, and quickly got interested in RFX when I started to learn Houdini.
Our presentation will focus on the CFX department. For the last years, the project we receive at Unity Image required more and more quality from the CFX department. We started to add more and more characters, pipette frequently, but also more diverse creatures. We also had to interact with more crowds, fights, and other complex contact between characters. This challenge led us to constantly review our setups and pipeline to be able to improve it for each project. We will start by talking about the history of this department at Unity Image, how it started, with which tools, what we faced through time, etc. And of course, what convinced us to switch to Houdini. After that, we will present our entire workflow from the initial setup to shot simulations. We will show you some tools and their implementation along the way. For this talk, we will focus on Netflix Love, Death and Robots Season 2 and specifically on the episode Snow in the Desert, but we will also talk about our other projects to show you different methods we use depending of it. We had a team of 5 artists working on 218 close shots and 3 people specifically for the 23 close character setups. Only 3 characters had an RFX setup: Irad, Baris, and the imprisoned man that appears at the beginning of the episode. We were 3 people working on it for 41 shots. Finally, we will talk about the next steps we are planning for the future. Let's start with the CFX Cloth. Previously, our main tool for cloth simulation was Maya with Marvelous Designer. It was quite difficult to adapt a setup when there were changes coming from the modeling department. Almost everything has to be written from scratch every time. Editing Marvelous simulation was very complicated because there are no proper animation features in the software, like adding keys or changing animation curves. We had to go back every often in Maya to adapt the animation. We also didn't have a friendly pipeline in Maya, and each layer needed to be simulated independently. The idea for the new pipe was to be relatively easy to jump into and use, to use our in-house standards where possible. We chose to use Houdini because it was already fully integrated into the studio pipeline. We are using it for air and fur simulation and FX. Then we focused on standardizing the CFX methodology between air and cloth to allow artists to join the team easily. And we tried to stay as flexible as we could to let more experienced artists to go into finer details when needed. We really needed the pipe to be easy to understand as we had a lot of new users during the project and we want them to be able to start working quickly. The shot work could be really separated from the setup work. Houdini's nodal approach allows us to have a non-destructive setup. We can easily update the character meshes without losing the work that was already done. We could now think about batching shots, designing graphs to build scenes, simulate and export automatically. It's now easy to update a published setup while artists are working without losing any of their work. For the cloth, we have three major steps. Bringing input, it's for import and clean all of the resources necessary for simulation, creation of proxy if needed. Solver is for setting constraints, simulation solver, adding wings, changing gravity, etc. Exporting output, wrap high-res meshes, generating cache files for the next stage. Here we import the asset character meshes. We have to put it in the right scale because it comes from 3ds Max. The meshes is then split in two parts. One for the full body on the right and the other for the clothes. As you can see, every cloth part has its own color. It's very important for me because I can easily recognize them by their color. With the custom group maker node, we choose which one will be cloth simulated meshes or cloth collider meshes. Then all of the meshes are grouped and recognized in different network boxes. Using this custom group split node, first I click on the autofill button. It will automatically fill the boxes based on the mesh's name. I can reorder them, group them in the same box. I always ask to order the meshes from bottom to top and from closest to the body to farthest. I also can isolate the meshes to see them properly with the check button. If there is a conflict, the meshes will show up as dark colors. And when all is done, I can click to the auto update button to create all of the network boxes. As you can see, the network boxes split their color from the meshes. It makes it very easy to see which network boxes is for which meshes. Most of the time, it's not useful to create a proxy from the mesh. As much as possible, we use the random mesh to simulate. Some meshes like buttons, belt buckles, and so on might be removed for the simulation. In the solver, we have the pre-roll in a network box to import the FBX bind pose and the animation FBX as well. Then we have two network boxes, one for the simulated classes and the other one for the collider classes. Both are wrapped on the pre-roll. After that, following the order of what we use in the custom group split node, we have all of the boxes with the simulated meshes. This is where we apply our attributes, groups, paints, and constraints for the simulation. At the end of each mesh's network box, we have a unit tweak node which sets to change the parameters without having to enter into the node. This node saves each parameter when we simulate. We can easily load them for any simulation cache. In the last network box, we have the .NET with a win parameter tool. We also have a sim tweak to control if we want to simulate bypass, make simulation close as collider, or resimulate only after a specific frame. As you can see, everything is clearly separated and readable, so anyone can quickly find their way. Same as for the input and the solver, you can identify the different parts at once. The first box grabs the simulation from the solver. The middle network boxes hold the various simulated meshes. High-res meshes will be wrapped if there is a difference between the simulated one and the high one. Finally, a last network box will group all meshes together. It will be used for generating a review and publishing the setup. While working on shots, the artist only uses the solver and the output stages. On the solver, users will find custom tweaks nodes, as I mentioned before, to edit any useful parameters from the shot. This will also be used to save local changes when the setups change upstream. Our average simulation time is 8 seconds per frame. On the output, the workflow is similar. Tweaks nodes expose useful parameters to apply changes for the simulation result as well as the default setting to wrap the render meshes to the low res when needed. We have a custom nodes to point deforming bases by curves. We always had issue when we did that because the curve rotate on their own and makes the mesh have a rotation too. To fix that, we use a mesh as reference. Most of the time we use polygon from the collider, and we apply the normal of that polygon to orient the curve. It does a pretty good job, as you can see. Finally, our publish process will bring back the resulting mesh into the render scene in 3ds Max and generate a full render with texture, shading, and lighting. Thank you for listening. I let Laura continue with the Hair.
Thank you, Tommy. So let's start talking about the CFX Hair. Before, we used to do most of our groom with Ornitrix and simulate all of them with Maya. Now they are all done with Houdini most of the time and all simulated with Houdini as well. We switched to Houdini for hair simulations during the production of God of War trailer. At that moment, on other productions and on this one as well, we started to use Houdini for groom, and that was when we knew that there was something there that maybe we could exploit to create our own setup with our own controls. Because the biggest issue we had with the old pipeline was the restrictive controls. The main goal at the beginning was to have a stable pipeline between Houdini and 3ds Max, so the first setup was very basic. I must say as well that the FX started under the supervising of FX department before becoming an independent department about 1 year ago. The support of the FX team was essential and led to what the Hair setup is today. After switching our pipeline under Houdini, not many things changed between the character and FX department. When it started, not too many things were required. It's just with time and due to the more and more complex movies we were producing, we targeted the aspects that could optimize our workflow and quality as well. We pay attention to the number of hairs, sampling, the overlap of clumps, and some more things depending of the design of the groom. For complex haircuts, we discuss about the animation simulation before letting someone start the groom. An important point as well is how the hair is distributed on invisible zones on rest position, like hair under arms or long hair covering neck, for example. This is often solved with the test of blend shapes during the build of the groom. And for Love, Death and Robots, for example, movie with high-res characters seen in close-up with a lot of expression from a lot of angles, many blend shapes were tested before publishing the groom. Let's switch to the setup. As for clothes, we have 3 major steps: input, solver, and output. Input. This is where we import all the resources we need to work. We do it with a resource manager that automatically detects the published resources that are available for us. We import the groom, scalps, and collision meshes in rest pose that will be cached in the setup and summoned in every shot scene. While working in a shot, we import the scalps and collision meshes with the animation of the shot detected. We do sometimes also import other kind of geometry like jewels, dust, snow that are set up as well here to follow the groom after simulation. To focus back on the groom, there are major steps we only do in setup, like we create groups if necessary to split the groom in different parts. That split would permit us to manage settings separately for each group. Like for example, we often create a group of very little hairs detected by their perimeter to extract them easily from other steps like simulation. That's what happened here with the haircut of Herald. She has 2 groups, the ones that were going to be simulated and the ones that won't. There are also other examples of their utility. I will show you after with other examples. Then we create the guides in two variations for the groups that will be sent to simulation, the low and high. The difference is the number of guides. It permits us to choose while working in a shot what is more adapted. A low number of guides simulate faster than a high number, but it's also less qualitative. Once that's done, the groups of grooms and guides are cached and are ready for the next steps. The scalps and meshes also receive a bit of treatment here. We use the pre-roll node as for Cloth FX to add transformations to the animation to adapt it more to our simulations. Things like adding interframes, editing main position or rotation, freeze the character, etc. So here are the examples I mentioned I wanted to show you. This is also a good transition before switching to the next main step, the solver part, because there I explained to you that we have three different ways to simulate the groom. You can see the three of them there. I will explain. On left, it's the low variation, and on right, it's the high one. The IDs mean the number of guides. The character on left, Radon, has 2 groups of hair and 7 groups of fur. The 2 groups of hair were simulated so they have guides, and the 2 variations low-high for each. The 7 groups of fur were animated with noise and didn't require guides for this method. The character in top right, Aloy, has 8 groups for her haircut, and each has the 2 variations as well, low-high again. This haircut is a very good example of the utility of the groups here. I needed to control each parameter of these groups in a separate way to be able to have the simulation I wanted. She also has 5 groups of fur animated with noise, as for Radon. Finally, the one on the bottom right, Bristle, has 4 groups. There are 2 with guides, and that's the only ones that were simulated. There is one of very short hairs that were only deformed on the surface, and the one with the braids were animated with the third method of simulation animation. It's the wrap deformation I'll explain in the next chapter. The jewels and snow that are notified here are the kind of geometry we do sometimes add in the setup, as I mentioned before. So let's talk about the solver, the second step. As I mentioned before, we have 3 methods for simulation animation. Those methods are simulation, noise, and wrap. The choice of which method to use depends on the design of the character and what is needed. For example, for Bristle, the character on the bottom right here, we agreed on the braids are going to be handled by the animation department, so the hairs just need to conform to it. For the fur on Alo's cloth, we knew they were not visible too close from camera, so a noise animation was enough. So let's get back to the solver. So the simulation, it's the only method that uses the guides low-high that we have created in input. We start by setting different parameters before sending the guides to develop solver. Settings like bend stiffness, pinnet points we have choose, mass, thickness, glue points, and some other parameters. Each of these settings are independent to each group you have configured before. I take again the example of Aloy's haircut. She has 8 groups because I wanted the mass to be different between the big and thick braids, for example, or the glue to act on the rolls on the top of her head but not the rest, etc. Another thing we set sometimes, not for every shot, but it can happen. We have a tweak node where we can modify the start pose. Sometimes you don't want to start your simulation with the groom in rest posing. It can happen that you already want to draw a flow in the air for starting the simulation, and you just don't want to simulate your guides during I don't know 50 frames just to obtain that silhouette. So you have that node where you can at least brush a bit the airs before starting the simulation. After that, we have to clean a bit the collision mesh before starting to simulate. At this moment, you can choose if you want to use a low res or a high res mesh, depending on the shot you're working on, the quality you want to obtain in the collisions. Most of the time, when I'm working on a human, to make nice contacts with the haircut, I have to get rid of all the holes on the face, because I've noticed that most of the time when the guys just go through those faces in the holes, like they stay trapped there and don't manage to get out again. So now I automatically get rid of these parts, as you can see here in the example of Herald on her low mesh and her VDB mesh. I know that I can win a lot of time doing this now. Now that everything is ready, we have our parameters on each group of guides and we have our collision mesh that is clean, we can start the simulation. The simulation is done with Vellum. Here you can see on the subnetwork some basic parameters that I have brought up that we use in most simulations. At this moment, we do a bit of back and forth with the parameters we have set just before until having a simulation that looks good. It will never look perfect, but we have some little nodes after the simulation to adjust the little things that may still not work during simulation. The goal with this is to not waste too much time doing simulations again and again, but to have something that already works, and then you can just rectify the little things that's still not working with those nodes after the simulation. You have the tweak node where you can manually edit some guides. All is permitted here. The only rule, keep the right point index. Then you have the post adjust rest node. You have here a little example of how it looks. It's a mix between rest position and animation on the roots with the help of ramps that you have here in absolute or relative. You can also activate the denoiser that you have here to kill those little vibrations. Sometimes this can help. And you have the readjust length node that will check and adjust the length of the guides in case they stretch during simulation. After that, your guides are clean and ready for next step. Now you can deform your airs on the simulated guides. Before deforming it, you have a little option where you can define the quality of the air. You can resample the air before deforming it. This is an option that should be adjusted just in shots, because depending on the distance of your air from the camera, maybe you don't need as much sampling as what you had in the rest pose. Once your value is set, the airs will be deformed with the first node for it, the air deformed node. It consists on a simple point deform based on the IDs. The deformation works pretty nicely. The only thing that doesn't work very well is the roots, and for that we created the air roots node that will bring back the right position of the roots on the scalp with the help of ramps. The same as the ones for the post adjust rest node that is here. It's a mix between the rest position and the animation one. Those steps of cleaning the roots, recovering the rest position are repeated often on the setup because we can't afford to modify the UV coordinates that are related to the position of each root on the scalp parent. After the deformation, we still have tweak nodes if we want to do some final adjustments. In that tweak node, we can do some edits, and I like to do some operations like ray, for example, if there is a big close-up. As for Herald, it happened to me many times. She had little hairs that are stick to her forehead due to sweat, and a lot of time with the post animation, the deformation on her skin, those hairs were tempted to go through the skin. So with the ray, I fixed that at that moment on the setup. Also, you can blast some airs there. There is no problem with deleting some airs, of course, not everything, but you can delete some airs that you didn't manage to control before at that moment. You can have your simulation over at this moment, or you can also add noise. This is an optional thing that I will explain in the next chapter because it's related to the other. It's the same technology, the same thing as the second method of simulation animation. And here for this case, it's just to add a little bit of detail over the simulation you have already done. Here are some examples of simulation. On the top, the two, you can see simulation with the IDs, and down you can see with ramps of resistance. What is interesting here, for example, on down right, is you can clearly see the difference between the rest position and the animation position that is controlled with those ramps I was talking about. This keeps the roots well fixed on the scalp, but also the volume around that area. Let's talk about the second method of simulation animation, the noise. So the noise is a false turbulence added to the air position mixed with a false drag, active in function of a ramp between rest and noise position, the same ramps again. Two levels of noise can be set up, one on IDs and one on airs. Here there is no simulation, so you don't waste time with the simulation. It's not the same quality. You don't have collisions here, but at least you can see it in the viewport instantly. This method is using the airs. There is no use of guides here. First, you have to choose on which IDs you want to have this effect. You're not obliged to do it on 100% of the air cut. Then you have to set the intensity of your false drag. The false drag is just a subtracted velocity from the scalp on which the airs are related to. Then you have to set the noise to choose which system you want to use. You have turbulent or curl. It's basic noises of Houdini. The only thing that is important here to calibrate is the speed to have something natural, the intensity, etc. This is the first step of noise on the IDs. Then you can repeat the exact same process but on airs. You can select individual airs. That's an interesting method if you are working in a very, very, very close up and you want to have individual airs with their own movement. These are some examples of noise method. I used it a lot on Hero because she has short hair. I use it also for fur or for creators with short hairs. Why? Because since this method is not simulation, it doesn't handle the collisions between the hairs. So with long hairs, it would be difficult to dissimulate. But at least for short hairs, this can help a lot and make me win a lot of time. The third method, the wrap, consists on deforming the hair on a geometry provided by a previous department, animation, cloth, post-animation. What it does is, as you can see here on the braid, it's bristle braid. It's this little mesh, this proxy, was generated by the character department and then provided to the animation, and the animation made the deformations that they wanted on that braid, and I just retrieve it in my scene and deform the air in function of this animation. So the first thing to do is to see if everything is right with this deformation. If not, I can manually deform a bit this mesh if necessary. Then I just need to check if the roots are right. I have access again to a ramp between a rest position and the animation position to fix this. After that, normally everything is okay, but I have access to tweak nodes if I want again to make some operations after that, do some blasts, or optional again, I can add some noise on this. That's it for the three methods. Once this is done, I can merge, as I said, the three methods, use only one or two, whatever is necessary. And what will be plugged just after that is the group of known simulated airs if it exists. Those airs are just deformed by roots on the scalp and merge at this moment of the setup. There is also an option to add a transition between the airs that are not simulated and the ones that are. As in my example here, you can see the red short airs are close to a zone where non-simulated airs are, so their simulation had been attenuated progressively. It's just to avoid to have a weird transition between both. That's it for the solver. Now let's jump to the output. You can publish now the setup when you are working in setup. Once everything is done, everything is finished, you want to use it now in a shot to test it, whatever. You have to publish it using the output exporter. You can choose the variations you want to export at that moment. There is a little sanity that will check if everything is okay with your scene, and then it will export it, and you will have access to it in every shot concerned. To export your simulation and see a render while you're working in asset or shot context, you just have to select the resources you want to export, the groom, and maybe some additional mesh if it exists like snow or jewels, and then publish. All jobs will be submitted to farm, and once they're finished, a render scene will be launched automatically to render. That scene is a very simplified scene, like there is no displays, there is a unique shader, only the shaders of the groom are present, and you have the lighting and camera from rendering department present as well. Those images, once finished, will be submitted to Shotgun automatically. These are some examples of the renders we obtained to check the Airfix. And that's it for the Airfix as well. As a conclusion, what we can say is that after working on all these projects all these years together, the CFX and FX department worked hardly on putting tools and workflow in common. Today, we can work in a more comfortable way after having put these aspects in common, all working in the same software, the same setup hierarchy, input, solver, output, as you've seen, an unique resource manager and exporter, common library of tools, unit file cache rob, pre-walls, and many others, and the batch tool. Still, we have always things to improve and are constantly researching for new solutions to fluidify even more some tasks. Each project brings a new challenge that always inspires us to create new tools. One of the aspects we are currently working on, for example, improving our tool of shot batch for CFX, and maybe trying to mix setup when necessary, Airfix and ClothFX in the same file. We really hope you enjoyed watching our presentation of our Cloth and Airfix workflow.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye, and thank you all for watching.